ladies and gentlemen, if I can bring everybody to order. So, distinguished speakers, members and guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. For those that don't know me, I'm Keith Brandt. I'm the Vice Chairman of ICC Hong Kong. I'm also the Managing Partner of a law firm, Dentons, in Hong Kong. And I'm the Chairman of the Organising Committee for today's event and tonight's reception. Not too long ago, ICC celebrated its 100th year anniversary, being at the forefront of facilitating global trade and making it more accessible to business of all sizes around the world. It's therefore a great honor to be standing here this afternoon as we come together to celebrate another ICC milestone, the 25th anniversary of the establishment of ICC Hong Kong. And together with the Asia Society Hong Kong Centre, we have the privilege and pleasure of presenting today's forum, Digital Trade and Finance in Hong Kong, Reasserting Global Leadership. The event not only is testament to the Chamber's enduring commitment to excellence, but also underscores Hong Kong's pivotal role in the evolving landscape of international trade and finance. As recently as only 2 weeks ago at the APAC CEO Summit held in San Francisco, notably around the time of Xi Jinping's US visit and exchange with President Biden, our guest keynote speaker, from whom you're about to hear shortly, John Denton, the Secretary General of ICC, he called on global leaders to continue to make progress on paperless trade. Championing that cause, tirelessly advocating for promoting digital trade, emphasizing the importance of incorporating sustainability data into the digitalization of trade processes, our moderator today and guest panelist, Pamela Ma, Managing Director of the Digital Standards Initiative of the ICC, has been at the forefront of ICC's leadership on digital trade. And she, together with a number of other market observers and notably participants in the forum this afternoon, have argued, rightly, that Hong Kong must not miss the boat as global trade goes digital. And there's, of course, good authority for that assertion. Just take a moment to reflect on the significant shift in the retail landscape during the past year alone. In a report of monthly survey of retail sales published in the Census and Statistics Department on November the 1st, 2023, retail sales in retail sales in digit growth in medicines and cosmetics, wearing apparel, other consumer goods, and jewelry and watches reached double-digit growth. The robust growth in categories like medicines, apparel, and consumer goods reflects the shift in consumer demand towards essential goods as typically observed in recovering economies. This, of course, underscores the growing importance of e-commerce. The figures emphasize the importance of a strong digital trade ecosystem for businesses to navigate and thrive in the evolving retail landscape, providing agility and access to a broader consumer base. Placing Hong Kong into a role of leadership in global trade appears to have also been at the forefront of Hong Kong's administration, as reflected in the recent policy address by our Chief Executive, who will be joining us later today. The government is unveiling an action plan for logistics development centering on smart initiatives, modernization, sustainability, and internationalization. The primary phase is dedicated to enhancing logistics capabilities through smart advancements and establishing an information platform for a smooth flow of data and goods across the Greater Bay Area. The envisioned data platform will interconnect major transport hubs, including the airport and commercial docks, with a commitment to daily sharing of essential data with stakeholders across the border. These strategic initiatives closely align with the overarching objective of fostering high-quality development within the logistics industry, as well as standing behind and promoting global trade as part of a broader drive to stimulate Hong Kong's economy. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this sets the scene and provides some context for this afternoon's forum. It's only fitting that we fit off the forum with a keynote speech and fireside chat featuring two exceptional individuals and highly recognized leaders. I've already introduced John Denton and Marjorie Yang, chairwoman of ASHK Group. Their expertise respectively spans global business leadership, international policy advising, the legal intricacies of international trade and investment, and we eagerly await what should be a stimulating discussion and debate on progress, challenges, and opportunities for digitalization of global trade. We have two outstanding panels this afternoon, bringing a truly global perspective to the forum. In the first panel discussion, our esteemed panelists are taking a deep dive into mainstreaming digital trade in Hong Kong. Their diverse perspectives of our panelists, the diverse perspectives of our panelists promises a rich dialogue on the future landscape of digital trade in our region. Later, during the afternoon, we're honored to welcome Mr. Eddie Yu, Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, for a keynote speech on the intersection of digital finance and trade and shedding light on the pivotal role of financial institutions in our evolving economic landscape. Later this afternoon, with our second panel discussion, that we'll explore digital finance and trade and how that can revitalize growth in Hong Kong, offering unique insights into the symbiotic relationship between these particular realms. At the conclusion of this afternoon's forum, around 6 o'clock, and joining us as guest of honor for the ICC Hong Kong's 25th anniversary reception, the chairman of ICC Hong Kong, Mr. J.P. Lee, will extend a warm welcome, and we will be honored to have with us the Honorable John K.C. Lee, Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, as our distinguished guest. Concluding my opening remarks, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to particularly extend our deepest gratitude to our sponsors, whose unwavering support has made this occasion possible. And you can see the sponsors here on the left-hand side. It's also important to extend our thanks to our supporters as well, and we are grateful for their commitment and determination to making this event such a success. The event would not have been possible without the support of the Asia Society, and I wanted to extend a personal thanks to Alice Mung, the Executive Director, and her team for their wonderful support. They've contributed so significantly to allowing this event to take place. So, ladies and gentlemen, the digital age is upon us, and it is clear that Hong Kong has the capacity to be at the very forefront of innovation. The challenges presented by the digital landscape are opportunities for us to reaffirm our global leadership. With collective commitment and a focus on leveraging digital advancements, we're poised to usher in a new era of success for Hong Kong. So whilst we celebrate the achievements of the past 25 years of ICC Hong Kong, we look forward with growing optimism to the promising future that lies ahead in digital trade and finance. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Alice.
Thank you, Keith. Ladies and gentlemen, and esteemed guests, as the Executive Director of Asia Society Hong Kong, it is my great honor and privilege to welcome all of you to our center and to take part in the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the International Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong, and to present and co-present with ICC Hong Kong the Forum on Digital Trade and Finance in Hong Kong, Reasserting Global Leadership. And it was really wonderful to see so many of Asia Society Hong Kong members here and as our guests, and I'm delighted that to share always our home with esteemed organization like ICC. Asia Society mission has much in common with ICC. As I read the information, and congratulations again, ICC Hong Kong and ICC for the 100th. Crossing that milestone is really unusual for an organization these days. So again, congratulations to both ICC and ICC Hong Kong. My understanding is that ICC came out of the ashes of the First World War. Asia Society in New York was founded by John D. Rockefeller III in the midst of the Cold War and in the aftermath of the Korean conflict. ICC Hong Kong was founded in 1998, shortly after Hong Kong became the special administrative region of China. Asia Society Hong Kong was founded in 1990, 7 years before the handover. And in Hong Kong, we even share some of the same founders. And some of you, I think Margie is one of them, and many of them are still with us as a supporter of both organizations. Both organizations strive to promote peace and prosperity during a time of uncertainty. In ICC's case, it was the promotion of trade. And in Asia Society's case, it was through education and promoting cross-cultural understanding. And it is with this mission that we, the government, in about 2000, gave us, we were able to negotiate with the Hong Kong SAR government to get this beautiful site. And in 2012, we were able to open this beautiful center to the public. So we're really grateful to the Hong Kong government for supporting our mission and allowing us to be where we are today. Education about the importance of Asia through its arts and culture and business is one of our primary missions. I believe that the founders of both organizations would have been pleasantly surprised and proud of the success of their original vision, but also, I'm sure, concerned about some of the same issues, conflicts, uncertainties that we're still facing today. I believe institutions like ICC and Asia Society matters more than ever as we continue to strive for lasting peace and prosperity. And again, I want to congratulate ICC Hong Kong on this significant anniversary celebration. And I want to wish today's forum a great success. And if you have time, I encourage you to wander around our beautiful campus. If not now, many of you are here in Hong Kong. Come back whenever you feel like, because this place is designed to share for the public, global visitors as well as local visitors. So I want to, again, echo this sentiment. Please come back and visit us. And I want to thank all of you again for being here today and allowing us to share our home with you. Congratulations again, ICC, and thank you.
Thank you, Alice. The opportunity falls to me to formally introduce John Denton, AO, Secretary General of ICC. I have to say, getting John here was a labor of love. He is one of the most busy people I've ever come across. His travel commitments are extraordinary. I sat on a call recently listening to his travel commitments for the year, and frankly, it was shocking. I know he's just flown in from Beijing and he's heading off this evening to COP28 in Dubai. So we are truly grateful that, John, you've been able to come and join us this afternoon to give us a keynote speech, which is entitled Digitalization, Global Trade, Progress, Challenges and Opportunities. So, John.
Well, Keith, thank you so much. I must say that you guys at your law firm like me so much you stole my name. I tell you, give me a break, okay? Friends, it was no pressure, actually, to come here today. One of the joys of my life is I've always spent a lot of time in Hong Kong. And I actually really like, by the way, the title of the whole seminar, because it really, or the whole forum, because it really brings to life my thinking about Hong Kong. I like this idea of reasserting global leadership, because I think you should never forget the power of this place. You know, I served as the Australian chair of the APEC Business Advisory Council on the finance and economics area for 5 or 6 years. And the interconnectedness that was actually, I suppose, characterized all my engagements with the Hong Kong business leaders who participated. And Marge is now an APEC Business Advisory Council leader. Victor Fung was one before, Vincent Lo. I mean, we can go on and on and on. But the interconnectedness brought you a level of global authority and leadership. Because I think, as Alice also alluded to, one of the powers of these sorts of institutions, and I use that word carefully, the ICC is an institution. We're not a trade association. The Asia Society is actually an institution. We stand for something. In the case of the ICC, we stand for enabling business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. And we do it through the prism of our fundamental belief that trading across borders improves livelihoods, improves the opportunities for communities. We focus on that. And what I like about the Asia Society as an institution is focusing not on the fact that we're all the same, but understanding the cultural differences that enable greater cooperation and greater integration, greater connectivity. We are the most connected business organization in the world, and Asia Society is similar, because in the 21st century, my friends, one thing we should never forget, that the source of true and real power will be connectedness. And never forget, that's why I like this title, because that is the essence of the leadership of Hong Kong. The essence of the leadership of Hong Kong will always be about its ability to connect outwardly. And I think that's something maybe we'll talk about as we move along. So it was no great strain for me to actually agree to come to Hong Kong. The only problem, frankly, was getting here. But I'm so glad I did. I was able to spend the last couple of days in Beijing, and I was honored to have a pull-aside with the Premier at the inaugural conference on global supply chains. And I understand why this is so important. Because when you look at the situation in China, maybe, Marge, when we talk later in our fireside chat, we'll talk about this as well. I mean, we know there's been a collapse in consumption in China. We know there's real problems with productivity. But we also know that one of the ways to actually make up for part of the gap will be through connectedness, through supply chains, through trade, through actually ensuring that the global system operates. That's all what's going on. So in a way, it's not weird or not odd, though it was completely an honor, though I did pass the COVID test so I could do it, to actually meet with the Premier, because he wanted to assert clearly to someone who's involved globally with business that for China, the multilateral trading system, the ecosystem that is created to enable trade across borders actually really matters. It's not just a rhetorical issue, because trading will actually be a key part of trying to move forward through this quite, I suppose, more challenging period. Let's face it, most business people in China have never known a down period. It's always been up, up, and up. And now it's moved into a down period. There's going to be some challenges in resilience. And resilience, as those of us involved in business knows, comes from understanding how you actually build that into your entities, and part of that will be through digital. And we'll come to that subsequently as well. So, after all those words, can I just say, I'm really happy to be here, not just to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong, but to give you a bit of passion about why this city really matters and what maybe you need to focus on in order to ensure it does. And okay, let's be honest with each other. These are not the friendliest of times, okay? Let's be very clear that if you look at the context in which we're operating, we hear stuff like high walls, small yards. We hear about bifurcation. We hear about fragmentation. We hear about nearshoring, friendshoring, all these sorts of elements. That's what's infecting, in many respects, the thinking about the way in which the global world operates. But it's actually really important to think within that about the role of an entity, an economic entity, like Hong Kong, as a great connector throughout all of that. And there is no doubt that the major shifts that we're seeing in demographics, the technological development, the environmental concerns, the resource scarcity, and let's be honest as well, the geopolitical frictions are actually enlivening this context. But we don't have to accept a narrative that says that the only end to this context is deglobalization, fragmentation on a permanent basis, bipolarity, etc. We don't have to accept that as the end of the narrative. That becomes self-fulfilling. In fact, we were discussing this earlier today, that a narrative that only speaks down and talks down about the prospects of Hong Kong can become self-fulfilling. We actually have to remember why we are reasserting global leadership, because of the strengths of the organization, the strengths of the entity itself. So let's also be clear, there's a lot of static and there's a lot of noise about decoupling. But actually, let's go beyond the static and actually look at what's really happening in the data. A paper presented at the Jackson Hole Economic Symposium in August this year found that the great decoupling has mainly affected China's positioning in global supply chains, having moved from assembly to upstream tiers, rather than China's overall participation in global supply chains. In fact, the Bank of International Settlement, its most recent piece, actually unpicked this even further. Supply chains are actually not decoupling. They're not getting shorter, they're actually getting longer. And you can understand why. Because in some cases, there's a little level of inefficiency and intermediation being built into supply chains. In a way, that also tells you a little bit about the resilience which comes from the innovative thinking of the private sector, how to navigate this context in which we're operating at the moment. So research shows that China is still deeply embedded in global trade, as it rightly should be, as I said before. If you think about the situation China's in at the moment after that high growth period, a high opportunity, high infrastructure investment, etc., and the challenges they're confronting now, the gap needs to be filled, and one of the ways of filling it is actually through enhanced focus on exports, enhanced focus on connectivity, enhanced focus on inward investment, etc. And given the depth and breadth of the manufacturing and technical capabilities presented in China, this is hardly surprising. And the ability to recreate that quickly elsewhere, you know, sometimes when I hear politicians speak, you actually realize they don't understand how complicated it is to unpick a supply chain. I mean, supply chains were built, in particular, having been involved in the APEC process for so many years, supply chains were built on a very strong Scottish iron law, which is one of comparative advantage. That's actually what the basis of supply chains and transparency is, finding the most efficient place in which goods and services can be produced. It's very hard to unpick that. It's very hard to unpick that, and also the reality is that recreating the models and the ecosystems that supply the supply chains and the value chains will not happen quickly. And in fact, the data shows it's not. Yes, there is incrementalism. There is no doubt about that. But as I said, supply chains are not disappearing. Supply chains are not shortening. They're actually lengthening. And supply chains are learning about the resilience that's necessary. I think there's another element we need to look at, not just the way in which supply chains operate, but the actual issue of global fragmentation itself. And frankly, I think the jury is still out on this one. Yes, it's clear. You must think I'm a good news bear come to talk to you today. I'm only giving you good news stories all the way through. It's clear that the global economy is facing several disruptions, even going beyond the ongoing tragedies in Ukraine, the Middle East. For example, we've seen the new trade barriers introduced annually have nearly tripled since 2019 to almost 3,000 last year, while non-tariff barriers such as complex trade bureaucracy, and we see a fair bit of that still, represent barriers to small, medium enterprises engaging in global value chains. Moreover, geopolitical and economic frictions have actually caused another big issue, which is rendering more complex cooperation on transnational, transboundary issues, from cybersecurity to climate change. It makes it much more difficult. In fact, one of the big issues we're dealing with is I suppose the sub-theme of COP28 is the breakdown of trust between what's known as advanced economies and the global south. This breakdown in global cooperation is incredibly challenging to actually dealing with these cross-border, transboundary issues. And this is contributing to fuel the existing feelings of mistrust and has actually given birth to a new political economy grouping known as the Global South. And this is actually something to bear in mind as well. By the way, one of my, I suppose, challenges when I took over as leader of the ICC, looking at the platform that we have, the existing ICC, was to reorient it to make it relevant in the 21st century. We have expanded the ICC's platform to 170 countries, 70% of which are actually in the Global South. So we are the most inclusive business voice in the world. We represent more than 50 million businesses, employing more than 1.5 billion workers globally. Workers and their families rely on the success of the ICC's constituency for their livelihoods and prosperity. But I must point to that because this issue of trust can only be built, improved upon by inclusivity. And what we've done with the ICC as an institution is make it fit for purpose to participate in a way in creating an environment for these big transboundary issues to be discussed and agitated on. But let's face it, my friends, all these, the announcements of the end of globalization, as I said before, sound like a narrative which is very compelling. You know, doomsday talking is actually very exciting for a lot of people in crowds. But let's also be clear, we are not there. We are not deglobalized. We are not there yet. The World Trade Organization reports that world merchandise trade rose 12% to 25 trillion in 2022, counterpoint to the existing narrative of gloom. Furthermore, the value of world commercial services trade, which is extremely important to an economy like Hong Kong, was 6.8 trillion in 2022. That's up 15% from a year earlier. And we can see that the trend is holding up despite the pullback in cooperation, showing once again that commercial ties respond to real needs on the ground. They are a lot stickier than politicians and a number of protagonists understand. They are a lot stickier in the face of the global political winds that we are feeling. But this should not lead us to complacency. The IMF has estimated that the cost of geoeconomic fragmentation could be as high as 7%, my friends, of global GDP, which amounts to an aggregate sum larger than the GDP of every economy in the world except for the USA and China. And technological decoupling could exacerbate that considerably. In some economies alone, there'll be a 12% decline in GDP. So this means that for businesses across the world, there is no alternative to maintaining support for a rules-based multilateral trading system. This is more necessary than ever. We at the ICC believe that we need to do more and faster to design and create the inclusive international system needed that is fit for purpose in our rapidly changing world. We are concerned by the steady fragmentation of the global trading system and the weakening of rules-based multilateral trading system anchored at the WTO. For this reason, at the APEC summit, as Chris said, I launched a blueprint for reform for the WTO. But at its heart, that blueprint called for leaders to reaffirm their commitment to the underlying principles that enable a global trading system to function. An underlying principle of the respect for comparative advantage, effectively. And we were very honored that the actual San Francisco Declaration, the only unified part of that was actually around support for the multilateral trading system in exactly the terms that we kite for, as we have at the G20, as we will continue to do elsewhere. Because it's in everyone's interest. Multilateral cooperation, my friends, is actually not an act of charity. It's actually in the economic self-interest of economies and of political leaders and of society. Our message is clear. Governments continue to need to reaffirm their commitment to the foundational principles for the WTO. As recently as last week, I discussed with the WTO Director General, Dr. Ngozi, that we need to see, in order to give effect to the rhetoric of support for the multilateral trading system, real progress on reform of the WTO at its ministerial meeting in Abu Dhabi in March. Interestingly, Dr. Ngozi shows real leadership at the WTO. Leadership does matter. She asked me to help create a business advisory group because she wanted to change the dynamic. She wanted to create more political capital, more voices of support for the trading system that she could use in the WTO itself. You know, the end users are business, and the end user's voice was not actually in the deliberations of the WTO. So what she's been able to do with the ICC is carefully curate the opportunity to bring that. And what that does is help us bring forward the key priorities that matter to business itself. And I'd also like to stress here that as we move forward with reform of the multilateral trading system, with any prospect of success on grappling with climate, it needs to be inclusive. We need to ensure that the interests of developing and least developed countries are not paid lip service to, but are integrated and integral, as we have done with the ICC. Let's face it, when we have 170 countries operating on one platform, we actually have available to us the world's largest second-track diplomatic network, and we are inclusive, and we want to make certain we bring that power. On climate change, global governance, again, must adapt to push forward hard decisions that will protect us now and into the future. We know consensus is difficult, but there are no alternatives to multilateral solutions to move forward. After today's event, as Keith said, I will fly to COP28, which we see as a critical test of the international community's commitment to the Paris Agreement. And we will be mobilizing our global network in support of ambitious aims there. And let me tell you that we are taking the largest delegation, Justin will be with us, we are taking the largest delegation of business ever to the COP process this year. And we have to be really frank here. There is no doubt, and I'm sure there are a number of bankers in the room, I know there is not business people in the room, and we can go on. The business community is ahead of governments. What we're trying to do is get governments to catch up. The acceleration we're seeing is actually not done by governments. The acceleration of activity and lowering emissions is done by business. But what we have to do is do more, and they need to work much harder on ensuring that the frameworks they're responsible for are aligned to enable us to do more. I sit on the board of one of the largest infrastructure investment entities which comes out of Australia, IFM Global. We're about a $250 billion fund. We are committed to net zero. What gets in our way is not our commitment, is the lack of policy alignment on a global basis. These are the sorts of things, these are real issues. We can identify where those gaps are that we take. So let me focus now on this issue of digital, okay? And I'm not going to speak to you for another hour and a half. I promise you, just another 2 hours, so please bear with me. So at the same time as doing everything above, we must seize the opportunities that exist at a more micro level around trade and small businesses. And this is what brings us here today, digital trade. In a world where we've seen extraordinary advances in digitalization in recent years, it's quite underwhelming, actually, that the global trading system still operates on the basis of billions and billions of paper documents. You might think this is amusing, but my commitment to, I suppose, my passion for the journey of taking trade from analog to digital actually happened here at the Hong Kong Club, when I had lunch with Victor Fung, when I agreed to actually take on the role of Secretary General of the ICC. I said, I want to have a big mission, Victor. I just don't want to sort of like take on a job and hang around. And I was saying to him, you know, what I'd like to do, I wonder if can we take trade from analog to digital? Let's just put it out there. And he said, I think you've got your three-word mission. But I mean, that's actually what we're trying to do here, take trade from analog to digital. And when I talk about billions of documents, do you realize that 99% of bills of lading in 2023, yes, you're nodding, madam, it's great to see you, are actually still paper-based? Let's reassert global leadership here. That is ridiculous. And that's the kind of problem that I pondered when I talked about taking trade from analog to digital, which is why I decided to create the Digital Standards Initiative in Singapore, actually, in order to advance that cause, which Pamela, a Hong Kong girl made good, is now leading for us in Singapore. Because our realization was there was no one doing it. There's a public policy failure here. So, as always, the ICC, as this institution devoted to global trade, stood up to ensure that we could take trade from analog to digital and to go paperless. But more than that, we also needed to align interoperable global standards for digital trade documents, the data and the system, so that the entire trade process and ecosystem becomes simpler, cheaper, and more transparent. Frankly, lowering the cost of trade and enabling access for more and more businesses. That's how you help SMEs, not with government grants, but by actually making the system conducive to their needs, by changing, looking at the barriers, the pain points, and removing them. This is a big pain point. And governments around the world will need to push ahead with legal reforms to support this. And that's one of the missions we're on at the moment. This, by the way, is a low-cost policy intervention by governments. Because the reason these documents still exist in paper form, and I see a number of lawyers in the room, is because jurisdictions don't recognize the digital version of them. So you actually can either throw your hands up and say, well, that's just the way it is. Or, as we do at the ICC, let's change that. So what we're doing, we work with UNCITRAL to create the model laws on electronic transferable records, and what we're doing now is helping governments around the world build the capability. We actually have got the commitment from the G7, we've got the commitment from the G20, but the issue, of course, and those of you who are involved with changing things in the world, it's not that it doesn't make sense, and it's not that it's not like, well, not that hard to do, it's just that it doesn't have political priority. So we actually have to raise it up the political priority list of governments to get action on it, and that's what we're doing. And we're having success. But you know, we want to have success in Hong Kong. We want you to reassert global leadership. We want you to actually argue for this, because if you really want to help the SMEs in Hong Kong get access to global trade, make certain it's efficient. But also, by digitizing, you're going to actually create better facilities for access to trade finance. All these sorts of areas to actually enable inclusive trade, enable inclusive opportunities for everyone. So that's a key thing. And Hong Kong, my friends, with its leading position in both trade and finance, and I'm reading what's written here, you'll be glad to know, is a great place to showcase and roll this out. So, my friends, it's likely that next year, I'm afraid, we'll continue to see headwinds. We're facing a year in 2024 with more than 40 elections globally, and not all of them will go the right way. So in order to preserve the global commons, full of multilateral cooperation and generous engagement, but also forward-looking opportunities that enable prosperity for all, we need to lean in, not just on the narrative, but on the actions to support global cooperation. And we can't be idle in the face of these challenges. We must support the emergence of a multilateral system that works for all of us, while continuing concerted action on trade, inclusive finance, digitization, and building a more resilient and sustainable future. Friends, the ICC is devoted to this mission, but I'm sure we are all united in our common cause, which is to enable prosperity for all, for communities, to actually make our families' lives better and to make our future lives, the future lives of our families, better and stronger as well. We can do that, but we actually have to be just not unified in the idea, but in action. Thank you very much.
John, thank you so much for that. One cannot but say the enthusiasm, the energy that you bring to the discussion is truly infectious. Just picking up on that point, we want less doomsday. We want more good news. John, you are always welcome to Hong Kong when you bring that infectious enthusiasm and good news to us. So, giving you a chance to have caught your breath, not very long, the chance now is to hear from John and Marjorie, who are going to give a fireside chat. I don't think there's a title to this, so the stage is yours to adopt whatever chat you'd like. So thank you both.
You know, while you were on stage, I was looking at the title, and I'd like to propose that we do not try to reassert ourselves in global leadership, because, you know, I think we should stay low. The reason we are under attack is because we are a global leader in trade, and we continue to be. But we are being attacked because we are that. So maybe we should stay low, like, you know, like most women, and just be the force behind maintain the force but not be the front face. Do you agree with me? Do you think that we'll be under less attack if we just stay low
Marge,
and stay, like a...
I think the idea of you staying quiet in the background is something I'm struggling to sort of match with reality. I actually don't think the global world can afford for Hong Kong to stay quiet, and it can't afford for Hong Kong business to stay quiet. Because I think you have to understand the narrative which is being projected, but on a principled base, make the argument which has always supported the effective operation and the growth of the ecosystem, which is the Hong Kong economy, about the need for interconnectedness. Because you can lead by example, you can also lead with success stories. You have made a difference to the global community, to the global world. I don't think if you're shy about that, it actually helps the global narrative. And you talking about it's not a bad thing, Marge.
So let me tell you why I became a member of your board. I guess most people here know that my company is a victim of global macroeconomics. So I was complaining to a lot of my friends, and one of them is, of course, Victor Fung. And Victor said, what you need to do is to join an organization that has a bigger voice. Because everything you say makes sense, but it's not going to be heard unless you are part of a bigger voice. So Victor said, go and join ICC. And then Victor also said, Hong Kong's presence at ICC has shrank after I guess Victor was such a, he's a mentor for many of us here, especially in trade, that once he stepped down, we just thought that, well, we don't need to participate anymore because Victor's already set the standard. His standards are too high. So, and Victor said, Hong Kong need to participate more in this. And then when I joined ICC, I realized that ICC is very Europe-focused. The meeting times you have is always my dinner time. But however, I believe that what Victor said is true because the voice of ICC and what ICC represents is so important to us. How do we get more involved with ICC?
Well, actually, you have 2 members of our executive board from Hong Kong, which is pretty amazing, really. Justin D'Agostino and you, Marge, which is, we have a very interesting board, by the way. When I took over as Secretary General, I looked at the board and it was not dissimilar to a couple of the photos I've seen of Hong Kong leadership as well. It was like 80% men and maybe 1 or 2 women. Over the last 4 years, we've now moved to just under 50% women. We now have extraordinary regional diversity. We have now 25% of the executive boards from Africa, another 25% from Latin America, and actually similarly with Asia. Of course, presence is interesting and it's a nice number to have, but bringing a voice which is able to influence is incredibly important. And frankly, those of you who sit on boards like I do as well, it's not just turning up, it's what have you got to say which is actually going to help create value in the way the organization operates. And that's what you can bring. You bring the level of specificity around supply chains. The operation of supply chains as it applies to multi-fiber is different to the operation of supply chains as it applies to heavy engineering. There's too much big talk without enough understanding of the micros. The micros really matter in these discussions. And I'm not saying we reduce Marjorie Yang to talking about micros, but you bring a level of authority to the discussion which is very influential to ensure that when we're talking about the issues, we're also focusing on the right priorities, which was really important. Just before I get off why I think it is very important for you to be involved with the ICC, another data point for you is that at the ICC, through the instruments that we curate and enable,
we actually enable $17.5 trillion worth of trade on an annual basis. That's almost $10 trillion in trade finance through through instruments like the Incoterms that we create, through certificates of origin. We actually enable 17.5 trillion, which, by the way, as I said to the Chinese premier, is the GDP of China, just by the way.
So ICC welcomes the participation of SMEs, and Hong Kong is vibrant because of its SME community. So there is a place for us. So I think we should work very hard in Hong Kong to get everybody in that space to come together and then upload it to ICC platform so that there is a loud voice from Hong Kong. On digitalization, I see Anna Ling, and I've known Anna for over 25 years, from the days of auto ID. Anna is, and we're still at it, and it's really good to see that. And this is a Hong Kong initiative. Hong Kong has been, involved, and then of course younger ladies like Pamela takes it on and keeps running with it. So, what do you think? Coming out of APEC, do you see movement on digitalization within APEC, and which economies are emerging? And don't say Singapore.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, APEC is very positive in terms of digital trade. Make no mistake about it. I've been involved in APEC for a long time. Sort of left the APEC Business Advisory Council a number of terms ago, but we started that journey at APEC with digitalisation, and that was led very much by players from Hong Kong, by the way. And it's great to see the continued engagement of Hong Kong as an economic unit, despite the challenges in the APEC economic cooperation area. And also a very strong voice in APEC, don't forget. So digital, I think it's actually, from a policy point of view at APEC, it's going well. But the bit that's missing still is the political prioritisation on relatively, sort of low-hanging fruit, like recognition of electronic transferable records. But, there are some challenges. Let's make no mistake, those of you who follow this closely would have noted that almost in the mornings leading up to APEC, the US shifted its position at the WTO on the issue of the commerce talks that are taking place there, and suddenly did a volte-face and argued for policy space in order to deal with coding issues, etc., which were supposed to have been regulated through the plurilateral agreement that was taking place there. That's a very significant shift. And I know because friends of mine were actually leading the discussions in Geneva, Australia, Japan, Singapore, all allies of the US. They had no idea that this volte-face was going to take place. And actually, what it's really done is taken the teeth out of that, the commerce agreement that was developing there. So this is a significant issue, and it goes partly to trust as well. The other issue that we're confronting now, and I hope this doesn't sound like a boutique issue, but it's actually because it's really important. When the WTO came into existence, it actually only went into existence 2 years after the internet went into the public domain. Let's not forget that. And actually, it actually only came into effect when there was this first joining up of the internet with payment systems, which gave rise to e-commerce, which meant that when you think about the WTO rules, which have not been upgraded since then, they never incorporated the digital economy. That's just why these talks that America's just done its volte-face on, which were plurilaterals because you couldn't get a universal agreement up, were so important. But the workaround which actually occurred there was to stop tariffs being placed on cross-border data flows, was called a moratorium that was put on basically e-commerce, on putting tariffs on that. And that's actually renewed on an annual basis or biannual basis. And at the WTO, it requires unanimity. So that moratorium, which stops tariffs, duties being placed on cross-border data, is actually basically renewed on an annual basis. And it has to be by all the members, 194 members. One country can stop it being renewed. And of course, we're in such a happy global context where everyone gets on so well that you wouldn't be surprised to know that there are a number of countries who want to use this as a bargaining chip. So at the moment, India, Indonesia, and South Africa are proposing to remove their support for the maintenance of the moratorium, which is a huge problem because you think about how data transfers across. You think about moving videos, video content. It's not just one data point. It's like thousands of data points for nodes, etc. Tax and customs officers are going to have to find out a way then to actually raise customs on that. That's going to effectively make a lot of the business that happens on the internet unworkable. That's enough, more than Kim Kardashian, to break the internet. So this is something that's really important for us at the moment. And we did not get clear guidelines from APEC as to whether or not a country as significant as Indonesia would maintain consensus on that. And that's something we're working on at the moment. So there are threats to the development and the maintenance of an effective digital economy. And our job at the ICC is to enable business, which is why we're so passionate in our support of this.
So APEC, the business advisory, the business sector of APEC has recognized that we need to move it on a subnational level, and the business sector should take a lead on it. So tomorrow, APEC USA is hosting an all-day event here at Asia Society on supply chain. And obviously, they also feel that Hong Kong has that energy to, particularly because Hong Kong is now hungry. Actually, Victor told me the reason we haven't been that proactive was because we're so successful, we got a little bit lazy. So now, I promise you, we are, how shall I say in a politically correct way, as older, elegant women know, we are now more humble, but we are no less aggressive. So John, I promise you, we are not gonna lose that leadership position, but our time, we just have to give it back to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Lovely fireside chat.
Well done. Thank you. Thanks. Well, thank you very much, both of you. Stimulating conversation, a lot of food for thought. We're already running behind and we are on a very, very tight timetable. So I'm going to invite our first panel to come to the stage, please. It's led by Denise Tang from the South China Morning Post. And we have got a great panel to talk about mainstreaming digital trade in Hong Kong, the entrepreneur in the 21st century. And it's a panel discussion on what digital trade means for Hong Kong and how to make it a reality. So if I can invite Pete Charon-Wonsak, Bertrand Chen, Pamela Ma, Wilkie Wong, and Denise Chang to the stage. The stage is yours.
So just so everyone knows, we've got a bit of a time crunch because we have to prepare the room for the chief executive when he comes. So we're trying desperately to end at 5:15. As a result, this panel will go until 3:40. We'll take a very quick 10-minute break and then go on to Eddie Yu's address. So,
all right.
Denise, over to you.
All right, thank you very much. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So when I started writing trade stories like 20 years ago, it was very different from what it is today. And for years, China has gained its reputation as the factory of the world, and then it churned out the largest number of goods around the world, and then and it also built a Hong Kong's role as a connector between China and the world. But then, the tide has turned because we have seen many disruptions in the business brought by geopolitics and then innovation and technology. So, so through the years, Hong Kong has got the busiest port, air cargo port in the world last year, but then the seaport has come down to the 9th in the top 10. So we see this contrast and also see that China is catching pretty fast. And now, it's got 6 seaports in the top world's 10 positions. So, there's so many changes. And then Hong Kong trade as a pillar to its economy, and it's at a crossroad. So what, in this panel we are going to talk about is to focus on the role of trade in Hong Kong, and also how the Greater Bay Area as the future growth engine, and how the city can reinvent itself through digitalization. So before we start the discussions, let me introduce our D speakers today. So we know Pamela Ma, the Managing Director of ICC Digital Standards Initiative. And then we have Wilkie, the CFO of ASHK, and then Pete Chario Wongsak, from Teleport, CEO's Teleport, and then Bertrand Chan, the Global Shipping Business Network. So I want to start with asking Wilkie. So how and why are Hong Kong's trading or traditional trading business digitalizing? Yeah.
Denise, thank you very much for the question. My honor to be here this afternoon to share a few words with all of you. I think when Denise talks about traditional business, I think it's important for us to understand the context that being traditional business doesn't mean that the business is backwards. It's just that the business has been around for a long time. Now, I think it's all the more important, especially for traditional business, to actually adopt digitalization as a way to maintain competitiveness. And the key is not so much about driving down costs. Of course, cost is an element. But two key things for digitalization. One is speed, and the other thing is the quality of the information. Taking another example outside of trade, when we, during COVID, digitized our product development because our buyers cannot come to Hong Kong and we couldn't fly to see them either. When we digitalized the products, previously it took us the last 20 years to tell them, look at the sample on the screen. Suddenly, they become accepting to it. So it's not just about cost, but about approving something much faster instead of waiting for the courier to send the goods over. And the other benefits of digitalization is that we save a lot of manual transposing of the information, saving all the paper that John has just mentioned. And that reduces a lot of errors, and errors are causing a lot of problems in the supply chain. So all of these, it should not be about cost, but about quality.
Right. So, Bertrand, how is your company responding to the new needs on the supply chain, and how has it been received in Hong Kong and China?
Thank you, Denise, for the question. It's a pleasure to be here today. Before I start answering your question, maybe give some background about Global Shipping Business Network. I think it's not as famous as ASHK Group for the people in the room. So we are a blockchain consortium, a not-for-profit blockchain consortium that was established in 2021 in Hong Kong. And among our shareholders, we have some of the largest shipping lines in the world and terminal operator. So across all our members, we cover roughly 50% of containerized trade. So that's pretty significant volume. And our mission is to help digitize trade. So actually very aligned with all the conversation that we just had before. Specifically, a product that we've launched quite successfully this year has to do with something that I think John already mentioned earlier, which is bill of lading digitization. So we have electronic bill of lading that was launched close to January this year. So far, we've run more than 100,000 BL, which is a pretty big number, given I think we're probably in the top 3 in the world for EBL. And that's mostly because it's very strongly supported by some of the shipping line based in China, essentially a COSCO shipping line, OOCL in Hong Kong. And this product, I think, will be a big change maker for this industry, for the shipping industry. And I think it's a harbinger of much more things to come. And paperless trade is probably the first step. There are, I think, much more things that can be done, not only for the shipping industry, but also for global trade, and has to do with trade finance and other things.
I see. So, Pete, how is Teleport responding to the digital supply chain imperative?
Well, thank you for having me. Congratulations to the ICC on your 25th anniversary, and it's a pleasure to be here, and pleasure to be at this very nice venue. I flew in from KL. So I flew in from KL, clearly from my last name, Keith. I'm Thai. and it was a challenge for everybody. My last name was not designed for cross-border pronunciation. But I flew in on a digital boarding pass, Denise. You know, nowadays we can just load it up on our phone, and there's no paper for me to fly from here to Hong Kong. But I'm in the air logistics side of the business, and if 99% of global trade goes through the sea, the 1% that goes through by air, 99% of that is also paper. So we issue airway bills, and I think IATA is what is the sort of standard-setting policy for us, and they've been talking about digitalization of airway bills for at least as long as I've been alive, and you can take a guess as how old I am. But in effect, I think we took on 3 planes this year, and our first destination for all those 3 planes was Hong Kong. And this is truly an opportunity, I think, for Hong Kong as the largest air cargo hub in the world to really exert a sort of standard leading perspective on digital and digitalization, because it has the ability to do that. So even from somebody who flew in from KL, representing maybe 70 million SMEs in Southeast Asia, we really see a big role that Hong Kong can play to drive trade for many, many SMEs.
I see.
Also.
I think please come more often, because Hong Kong needs more business travelers. So Pamela, so you just flew in from Singapore, right? So why are the standards now more important in digital trade environment, and what does it mean for Hong Kong?
So the reason that standards are so important in a digitalizing trading system is because we want to share data, and we want to believe that data is true when we receive it, so that we can eliminate all the checking and copying and emailing of different data points between each party on the supply chain. And the only way to do that is if we could standardize the data. The reason that you have a mobile boarding pass is because the IATA and all the airlines have decided, okay, here is the standard for boarding pass, so anyone who scans that will actually be able to trust the data, that you are you, that this is your seat, and so on. Horizontally in the supply chain, there is a lot of standardization. Like you mentioned, airway bill. IATA already standardized that around One Connect. But the thing is, on a supply chain, it's actually a finite set of data, which is repeated as the good gets passed down. And vertically in the supply chain, there's very little standardization. The way that the shippers are using data, the same data terms, is different from the way that raw material or manufacturers are using it. So that means the data is not plug and playable. You must download the data, recut it, and then plug and play it in another component system. And so it is really important, if we want to be able to share data and eliminate all that time that it takes to check and copy, that we actually use data in the same way. Same taxonomy, same technical makeup, and that means that data can actually be shared. And today, you can actually secure that data and you can validate it, so that when I receive a data packet, I know immediately, did the right party author that? Is it a true data, and can I run with it? All that process and checking is why trade costs in Asia are so high, 15% as estimate, versus in Europe, which is a very harmonized environment, or more harmonized, where they're 5 to 6. So the thing is, going paperless is one thing that, yes, we shouldn't be using paper because we don't need to. But the second thing is, as we shift to digital, we really need that data to really be seamless and shareable and true from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, before we go into deeper into digitalization, I think, I would like to go into the fundamental question about Hong Kong. So it's like in the past few years, manufacturers have tried to move out the supply chain from China to elsewhere in the region. To what extent does Hong Kong still serve as a gateway city to China, even though it's a very high-cost place? Who do you want to start with? Wilkie?
Well, in our case, because our manufacturing base is in Guangdong, so for us, the goods has to go through this part of the region. So I think, and I think a lot of people in the room or businesses in Hong Kong, the nature of a business, especially in manufacturing, is that you probably have your trading side, the front end in Hong Kong, and you have the manufacturing of the back end side of things in Guangdong or maybe other parts. So a lot of the business activities, a lot of the logistics will use Hong Kong because of the advantage in both the logistics, the finance, and also the other services. So I think this is an advantage that Hong Kong has to take advantage of, because there is, even though Hong Kong in itself has very little base manufacturing, but leveraging, I mean, now what we call the Greater Bay Area, that hinterland, that's a huge volume of businesses. And that part of it cannot move away. I mean, you can move factories, but then if your factory is already there, then that's the way that trade flows.
Right.
Yeah, so I think actually Hong Kong has had great advantages because of its geographical position. And so for the past 3 decades, Hong Kong got really rich because China was growing and all those goods had to come through somewhere. Today, there's a lot of room for other ports to be transparent, speedy, low cost, and so on. The game is transshipment. So what advantages is Hong Kong going to bring to the table? Can we digitalize and make Hong Kong's ports and Hong Kong-based seamless supply chains to be really seamless? And then it's not just the goods. It's actually all of those services that those goods require, the financing, the accounting, the laws, and so on. So for me, you know, I lived here for 12 years and then I moved to Singapore. I actually think Hong Kong has to fight a bit harder than we did in the past. We actually have to have a strategy for how we're going to use digitalization to make Hong Kong so much more competitive. And you know, I look at Singapore's port, 80% of that volume is transshipment. Why do they transship in Singapore? Because it is so efficient, it is so reliable, and is so traceable. And I think that government and business, they really need to work together. And you can see SG TradeX is founded by the government, but with all the private sector support, including the 3 biggest banks, commodity traders, and so on. It's not all Singaporean. Actually, there's a lot of foreign companies involved in SG TradeX. And so I think initiatives like the GSBN, absolutely essential to really make sure Hong Kong stays on the map.
Okay, thank you for this prompt.
I'm trying to help, Bertrand.
I think I would slightly disagree with what Pam just said about efficiency, right? I think the game of efficiency is a game can be played as long as you stay in the physical infrastructure. And to some degree, I think Hong Kong is already super efficient. Hong Kong terminal is really, really efficient globally compared to a lot of the terminals in the US, Europe. But at the end of the day, the question is, if as long as you stay in the physical space, you are limited by the physical interaction, right? How much space do you have to move this container? How many people do you have to serve this? Or even if replaced by automation, still it's a physical world. I think, as Pamela pointed out, as we move to more digitization, then Hong Kong's role becomes something very different. And to go back to what I think John said earlier, right? Traditionally, Hong Kong is east meet west, right? For trade, for manufacturing, for the global trade flows. In a digitized format, where you have physical supply chain plus financial supply chain, potentially from even carbon supply chain, if you take the example of decarbonization, right? Hong Kong can play a role where you can harmonize all these 3 flows. This is a place where you can coordinate all the trade, but not necessarily where the trade happens here, right? The physical supply chain is not here, but actually you can marry the finance, the managing the complexity of trade from here. And to do that, Hong Kong has actually very, very strong, I would say, advantage already, because you have the lawyers, you have the bankers, and you have actually also people who are very entrepreneurial. Because to seize the ability, seize the opportunity offered by this kind of change, what the nature of trade is, I think you need a new way to think about the business, right? And it's not about being more efficient, putting more robots using AI. It's about what is the competitive advantage of Hong Kong, really, compared to other places.
I think Hong Kong already has a lot of advantages. the best port in the world, the most efficiency that you cannot find elsewhere, and then financing infrastructure, legal system, and whatnot. But I think that now the question is how to raise the game further, because I cannot avoid mentioning Singapore. It's doing very well. I mean, how Hong Kong can up its game, in this arena. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think actually you need to legalize the use of electronic records in trade. Because as long as legally you might have to show up in court with a chopped or stamped document, then business won't move 100%. But let's say even you eliminate that. The second thing is ensure that anything you do is aligned with global standards. That means you're not limited to trade with those with whom you have relationships with already. You can actually trade with anyone in the global system. And that's why I think, Hong Kong, actually, we could say that it might have a disadvantage because Hong Kong was actually, as a wealthy, highly interconnected economy, it started digitalizing a bit sooner. Like, we had the Octopus card, we had E-Trade Connect and so on. So, but the thing is, these were all formed when Hong Kong could write the rule book. Okay, so now there are global standards. So Hong Kong needs to say, okay, how am I going to globalize and become the truly global port or truly global connector so that anyone can trade with me? And by the way, once you do that, you can actually open yourself to all of these SMEs all over the world who are just dying to get out and export, but cannot because they can't navigate the complexity of having to deal with 150 different national standards. The second thing, or the third thing, I think, is that, Hong Kong is a very top-down kind of place, right? Companies have clear leader, and if you're in the center, then you're in the power, and if you're kind of on the outskirts, then you're on the outskirts. But I think, we have really capable employees here. The universities are good, so we need to really empower people at the front lines by educating them about digital. So I think really educating people about what does it mean to go digital, where are the opportunities, that's how you're going to find that kind of Hong Kong kind of mojo about the Hong Kong way to do things.
Right. So what else can be done? Any ideas, solutions?
Sure. I think the contrast, I think it's a bit unfair to always compare Hong Kong to Singapore. They would love to do that comparison and to say, oh, Hong Kong is kind of falling behind, Singapore has some initiative. But actually, I'm involved a lot of the initiative in Singapore also because the government in Singapore has put, I think, where the money, where the mouth is, right? SGK DX, and many projects to digitize. But my view actually is it's not too late, first off. The second thing, which I think is unique about Hong Kong, is I think people are much more entrepreneurial here than in Singapore. And I think that's something that everybody can agree on. Singapore, I think, benefits of probably stronger policy drive. Say that's what we want to do and put the money is. Hong Kong probably more laissez-faire based on the history, let the market decide. And you sort of need a bit of both. Meaning that you need a very clear guidelines, a policy, and what exactly is allowed to do here, and let the entrepreneur decide, figure out how to create value. To go back to the digitization conversation we were saying earlier, right? I think one thing that's really difficult, and I think Singapore hasn't solved that, and no country, in my opinion, has solved that, is digitization for the sake of digitization is pretty useless, right? There needs to be an incentive. And I think the financial incentive is the most important one, it's the biggest driver. And Hong Kong has that, right? Because Hong Kong has a very strong financial sector. So if Hong Kong can figure out how to, through the strong finance center of Hong Kong, motivate digitization, creating better products, that's potentially one avenue where Hong Kong would distinguish itself. One example could be, right now, from Hong Kong government already, the policy is very supportive towards Web3, tokenization, right? I think it's a bit misguided right now. The understanding Web3 people is it's a scam, it's about NFT for pictures or speculation. But if you think about the tokenization is tokenization of real world assets, what is more real world than global trade, right? The trade flow, that's what goes into the cargo on those ships. And if you think this way, actually Hong Kong has a pretty solid foundation to link finance, trade, and the flow in Hong Kong, right? To provide the value and attract the flow to Hong Kong.
So, Pete, what's your take?
Yeah, I was trying to avoid talking about Singapore as well. But I'm from Southeast Asia, so I guess we have to talk about them as a model. But I think the whole of government approach of Singapore is just something to behold. I think with the perspective of kind of nurturing these policies to become reality and to make business meet policy, right? I think that's really, really critical. So I think it's frankly Hong Kong's to lose. If I give you a small anecdote, we operate sort of logistics assets that are very movable. So, right, a plane can fly to Macau, can fly to Hong Kong, can fly to Shenzhen, can do Guangzhou, can do any. We can pick any one. And so we decided that we were going to wait till the manpower crunch in the airport in Hong Kong would be lifted before we flew it internationally. So we had the option to fly to Macau. We could have flown elsewhere, but we waited. So I really feel it's Hong Kong's to lose, if I'm honest. And I think everybody desires to have that ecosystem come together to make digital trade happen. And the reality is the technology is there. The data exists somewhere. So really, it's just about the will, right? And it's about the ability to kind of make it happen in an environment that is complex, but the reality is all the ingredients are there. So, to be honest, I think it's just a matter of time. It just needs a bit of a push.
If I may add, I think the difference between the nature of trade between Hong Kong versus Singapore is that a lot of the trade through Hong Kong, and including the trade through in South China, is that a big part of it has at least one side of the destination or the origination in Guangdong. Unlike a lot of the transshipment, I think that's a key advantage that Hong Kong has. So it's not just about goods going from one vessel to another, but going from vessel to the rail, vessel to a truck, and then moving inland. So it's a lot more intermodal, and also the potential value add is much bigger. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is that the whole South China trade is also Hong Kong to lose in some way because, well, first of all, a lot of the port investments are actually by Hong Kong companies. There could be a lot of mutual benefits between the Hong Kong way of standardization or digitization and how that harmonizes with the Southern China. So if that can be also harmonized, then the opportunity from finance, the opportunity from services comes in because you don't need to be in Yantian to service the goods going for Yantian. I think that's the advantage you can have in Hong Kong and service the goods going out of Yantian. So the catchment for the services, for the trade going through Hong Kong is not just at the Hong Kong airport or at Kwai Chung. It becomes a lot bigger. So I think we should look at Hong Kong's whole trade flow more broadly and looking into a whole South China rather than just Hong Kong alone.
Right.
Just to add to what Wilkie said, I think the point about Hong Kong financing regional supply chains and global supply chains is really important. And it's actually a potential growth area if we can figure out how to use trade digitalization in order to make the trade finance process cheaper, which would expand the catchment area for borrowers, for Hong Kong-based lenders. And the key is that by digitalizing the trade, the operational supply chain, you're actually creating the data set which can then be ingested by banks in order to hasten and make less expensive the process of actually assuring the credit worthiness of the borrowers. And today, remember, there's a $2.5 trillion trade gap. Total trade is 25 trillion, so that's 10% of trade which is left unfinanced. And that is an opportunity, and I mean, I say that fully knowing that the finance sector has not had a bumper year for M&A and that they are looking for new sources of business growth. And the thing is, Hong Kong, with its trade knowledge, it can go grab that. And it's not only the banking services, it's actually the bundle, it's the insurance, it's the financial services, and then the accounting of that. So trade digitalization as a route to expand Hong Kong's bundle of services.
Right. So I mean, now it comes to a question: who should pull this, initiative? The government, private sector, or both? Or how to start off, for the case of Hong Kong? Yeah.
I think my suggestion would be you need pretty strong policy or let's say sandbox for people to try things, so that you don't get into trouble. But at the same time, I don't think typically it's really hard to predict what will work, what wouldn't work. So you don't want very stringent or very prescriptive policy from the government, right? So I think to design this policy will make more sense is for the government to work with the industry practitioner to enact policy to kind of make sense. But at the same time, let the private sector compete and figure out how to best utilize this new sandbox to try. So one example is, I think, for fintech, for finance, there's a lot of sandbox like this operating under ASHK, for instance. For trade, for digitization, I think something similar. That would make more sense.
So you think started from the government policy? So
I would say that the government has to give a really clear direction. And I hate to keep bringing up Singapore, but the Singaporean government made it very clear early on that digital was the future of the economy. I mean, obviously, because they have no actual natural resources. They are just people. And so you have to go digital because that's the future. And the thing is, Singapore government, they announced that, and then they said, okay, to the private sector, now figure it out. I think in Hong Kong, we haven't had that direction yet. And if the government would only make a sign, then business could have absolute certainty that the policy environment is not going back. And then they could actually have the expectation and then go through and innovate. I'm not saying the government should try to run things. Same as with DSI. On my board is WTO, World Customs Organization, Asian Development Bank, and the Singapore government. But who is determining standards convergence? Who is writing the baseline? It's all industry. Because industry is the one who actually knows how things work on the ground. So I think you need both.
exactly.
Well, if I may, I think instead of using the word direction, I think I would use the word conviction for the government, because I think for Hong Kong, I would think that the government would want to declare a digital first for everything. If you go to China, think about this. My friends coming from China to Hong Kong, one of the things that they're most unfamiliar with is to carry cash. I think Hong Kong, 20 years ago with the octopus card, I think we lead the world in terms of cashless transaction. We are pretty much staying at that level, so we haven't moved much maybe in the last year or two, we've moved a bit more. But I think there's the conviction for Hong Kong government to actually move things onto digital first as a principle for a lot of things to happen, and trade being one of that. And with that, I think so that the industry understands that this is something that the government is going to flip upon, and then the government can work with the private sector. I think, as Bertrand mentioned, I think to set up the sandbox, or I would say create a more looser regulations, because during the course of the process, your laws will lag behind the actual implementation. So there will be some gray area that the government needs to provide some kind of a gray area protection for the people that are experimenting. And so maybe some platform is going to teeter out, maybe some of them are going to fly, we don't know. But having that protection from the government, knowing that what are some of the regulations that needs to be adjusted or accommodated in the short term before we know what's the standard. So then the private sector can try out different things. And because I think at the end of the day, Hong Kong being such an entrepreneurial, there are a lot of energy in the private sector to actually take things forward if the environment is right. So I think the government's role is really to create that conviction and also create that assurance that the government has the private sector's backing.
I see. Pete?
Well, maybe this is the more controversial take, is that, in supply chains, there's a lot of intermediation. So there will be winners and losers in kind of pushing this. And I think it really helps to pick a side, because there are going to be some losers in this, and there are going to be some clear winners. And the winners, you'd hope, are the people that drive the economy forward, drive innovation, drive trade, drive kind of access and so on. But there are losers that benefit today from inefficiency, even in very, very efficient ports like Hong Kong. So I do think you have to kind of pick that there's a bigger initiative at play, and therefore that conviction hopefully can come through, and then you can kind of move accordingly.
Because of time, shall we go for the last, discussion point before we open the floor for questions? So the last question I would like to ask Pamela, can you share some experience from a particular city which Hong Kong can take reference to? Singapore again.
No, I'm not going to say Singapore. I'm actually going to say Thailand.
Good idea.
And it's it's not the first economy that anyone would think of to really go digital. But because of the Thai private sector, they have shown incredible leadership, and it's all around the Thai Bankers Association, that they have actually financed the creation of Thailand's first national trade platform, which is entirely digital. They have allowed digitalized clearance. They got their customs department on board. They are strong supporters of electronic trade, trade directorate, and they are responsible for basically making sure that Thailand's legislation for electronic transferable records will go on into the legislature in 2024. Wouldn't have happened without the private sector. And nobody told the private sector to do it. They just realized it was in their advantage, because digital is the way of the world. If you want to remain relevant, you have to digitalize, and you have to make sure that everything you do is actually globally plug and playable. So, I mean, that's the thing is, every economy does their own thing. They all have national circumstance. That's why the UNCITRAL, the UN Commission on International Trade Law, that's why it's the model law. It is not actually a law that you copy-paste into your national legislation. It is a model for how you can adapt to your local circumstance and the local kind of legal, common law, English law, whatever, in order to create the best solution for your society. And so, I mean, it's super easy, I think, for Hong Kong to basically make that commitment, but it's super difficult for governments to start walking the walk. And that's why, in China, we're actually working directly with the Chinese government, with the Ministry of Commerce, to train their middle level and frontline officials on what is digital trade and what do you have to do when the government decides to legalize electronic transferable records. China has that foresight because they plan everything, and they're very forward-looking. And I think that, Hong Kong, we have every opportunity to remain and to grow Hong Kong's footprint, but we got to start soon.
Absolutely. So we have time for a couple of questions. Okay, that gentleman in the middle.
No. I can shout. We have technology.
Wonderful, thank you. Paul McCoe, I'm the Executive Director of the British Chamber of Commerce. Now, up till about 6 months ago, I was the Director of UK Exports for the British government. So just a couple of reflections on what we were doing in the UK, and I'd be interested in your views. This whole, what does business do, what does government do? The first thing government did was enabling legislation for electronic documents. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but you put in, that's starting to show your conviction to this direction by enabling legislation. But what we did next was step back and then sort of hand the problem over to the business community with ecosystem of trust pilots, and we've got a e-commerce trade commission to say, how do you do this? And I'd be intrigued to know how much government just gives the job over and is saying, I'm ready to hear what I've got to do to make what you come up with work. Because I think government struggles, frankly, and departments between them are all fighting for security versus health versus God knows what. So I just share that, and I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, another one has questions? Feel free. We have time for one more question. All right, the gentleman.
Thank you. So I have a speculative question. In the realm of supply chain management, for the past decade or so, we've been hearing the mantra of digitalize or die, digitalize or die. And looking at how that's played out, businesses have contracted for sure, but I would not say that it's been what's been pretended. Now feels different. So if we were to say, look 5 years ahead, should Hong Kong not invest in digitalization of trade? What's the cost to Hong Kong businesses?
Wow. Anyone? Maybe Wilkie, do you have?
Well, not sure if I will give a good answer, but I'll give it a crack. Well, when you talk about digitalize or die, it's difficult to say whether it is so extreme. but I do see a significant disadvantage for companies that fail to digital. Part of the reason is that, well, very simply, in Hong Kong or in China, we keep talking about the lack of people, lack of labor. And most of the time, when we talk about the first stage of digitalization, we're dealing with the most boring thing in the world. Talking about, John mentioned about all these paper. It's difficult to find people to actually do these kind of work. So, well, another dimension maybe think about is, 5 years from now, are you able to compete with like the food delivery, Meituan, Food Panda? I mean, people would rather go do delivery rather than sitting in an office, like doing mundane paperwork. So one element that I would think is that employment, definitely one thing. And also, if you think about productivity, I mean, Hong Kong or other places, we're having highly educated people, but doing some mundane kind of work. I think that's also something that every company should avoid. So I think most companies, trade is one thing, but also internal processes within the company also needs to be digitized. So I won't say as much as say, if you don't digitalize, you die, because on the trade side. But for a company, if you fail to digitalize, you die, because your whole business model and your proposition as an employer comes down significantly without digitalization.
I think I would also add that by 2025, every company that's importing goods to Europe and the US is going to have to verify, third-party verify your carbon emissions, your Scope 3 emissions. You're going to have to do due diligence. You're going to have to prove it. And the thing is, there's no way you're going to handle those sustainability and social inclusion obligations and environmental obligations without digitalization. The complexity will kill you. And so, you know, and moreover, your goods won't get across the border because you can't prove it. You're not traceable. The only way to achieve traceability is through digitalization. So if you do it for your employees, you do it for their empowerment, but you also do it so to make sure that you actually remain relevant. The bar is rising, right? And I have no doubt, as someone who used to follow sustainability very, very closely, that the requirements are going to be rising. You think it's just Scope 3 today. Wait till you see what, you know, the bureaucrats are dreaming up for you and your supply chain in the future.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I think one of the biggest acceleration for digitization over the last couple of years has been COVID, right? So during COVID, you can see a spurt of digitization. A lot of companies who hesitated to adopt digitization started. Not everyone made the change. Now COVID is gone, it's behind us, and people say, actually digitize, even if I'm not completely digitized, it's still okay, because supply chain works, it's fine. But I think what the difference is, there are now two groups of people. Some who already done some action digitization, such that if, as we discussed earlier, there's more and more complexity, another disruption happens, then that shock may be much more violent for the people who have not digitized. So I think really that's the big change I can think of. Very simple example. Right now in China, we have a product called cargo release. Essentially, you can release the container without using paper. So some of the shipping lines have adopted, some shipping lines has not adopted it. I think in another scenario where you have COVID again, where you have lockdown, people cannot go out, and you still want to use paper, that scenario is impossible to imagine, right? And therefore, I think that's basically you'll have forcing function to have a crisis, and if you're not digitized, you can handle it. And your companies who can handle it, they survive.
Well, I think there's nothing worse than a slow death. So I think there is going to be a lot of slow death in this business, and you'd rather get it quick and painless and over with. But I do think because as an industry it moves so slowly and then suddenly, then you're going to see a lot of winners and losers, and I think that's the cost. The cost is the losers that don't keep up and don't see the imperative to change, and therefore they just cannot compete. And there's going to be a lot of that, I think.
Right, so digitization is a road of no return for everyone, basically. So thank you very much for the sharing, really great. So I get back to you, Keith, for the stage. Thank you.
Well, Denise, thank you so much for leading us through that discussion. A huge food for thought in terms of opportunities and challenges that we're facing with digitalization. But thank you, Denise, for taking the lead. And thank you, of course, to our great panelists. Pete, I'm not going to try it again, Pete. Bertrand, Wilkie, and Pamela, of course. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are on a very, very tight timetable this afternoon. We've got got now a 10-minute break. We have to be back here at 15:50. We've got Eddie Yu, who is the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. Welcome, Eddie. We are very much looking forward to your keynote presentation in about 10 minutes' time. And then, of course, after we've heard from Eddie, then we've got our second panel, which we'll talk about a little bit later this afternoon. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we can grab a coffee, get a quick comfort break, and we'll see you back here at 10:02. Thank you very much indeed.
It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Mr. Eddie Yu. He is the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. He is one of the strongest supporters of digitalization and future-looking in the finance sector. So please help me welcome Eddie to the stage for his keynote address.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. It is a great pleasure to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the ASHK with the very distinguished audience here today, and Hong Kong MA is very pleased to support today's event. If you remember at last year's ICCHK event, we share our thoughts about how connecting isolated digital islands can contribute to a more digitally integrated trade finance system, so as to address the pain points in trade finance and also improve the SMEs' access to financing. And today, I would like to share more of our thoughts on a more holistic approach to digitizing trade and finance in Hong Kong, and how to put all these different elements in digitalization together so that we can reaffirm our global leadership through accelerated digitalization. And this issue is especially relevant in Hong Kong because if you think about our economy, about 40% is made up by just trade and finance adding together. Trade is about 18%, and finance is 21%. So by digitalizing trade and finance, we are essentially adding fuel to these two major growth engines for Hong Kong, and also will take our city to another level. In the last few years, we've already witnessed quite a remarkable transformation in the way that business and trade are conducted. And the emergence of new technologies and their growing adoption have already revolutionized industries, reshaped customer behavior, and also redefined the nature of commerce. When we stand on the edge of a new digital era, we need to make sure that Hong Kong maintains our competitiveness on the global stage. And it's critical that we embrace and accelerate the progress of digitalization in both trade and finance. And the benefits of digitalization are clear. Better efficiency, less human error, savings in cost, speed to market, and also full traceability. And digitalization offers a multitude of opportunities to enhance our status in international trade and finance. And to capitalize on these opportunities, we have identified 5 key elements in digitizing trade and finance. Just like what we say in the Chinese culture, the 5 elements, 金木水火土, gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. These elements tend to be complementary. They tend to strengthen, support, and reinforce each other throughout our digitalization journey. The first element that I would like to talk about is the role of government. The digitalization of government services plays a critical role in facilitating digital trade and finance. By digitizing government services, we can make many of the government processes a lot more easier, efficient, and accessible. For example, importers and exporters will find it much easier to lodge their trade documents with the government through a one-stop online platform that's now called Trade Single Platform. And the government is also spearheading the development of Hong Kong's digital economy. They set up a Digital Economy Development Committee last year, and they're bringing together industry experts, academics and government officials for discussion and strategy formulation. The committee is now conducting studies on issues like digital infrastructure, is it adequate, efficient enough, and digital transformation of enterprises, including what can be done to speed them up. And they will put forward their recommendations early next year. And to accelerate digitalization, it's also important to provide open access to government data. Data is actually the new blood to the whole digital body. And a government-led data sharing initiative will be launched by the end of this year, which will not only enhance data sharing among government departments, but importantly, it will open up more types of government data for banks to access through the HKMA's commercial data interchange, or CDR as we call it. For example, the company's registry will become the first government data source to be connected to CDI before the end of this year, so that they can provide banks with more streamlined access to corporate information of registered companies, and that would help the KYC process digitalize in a big way. And building upon the foundation laid by the government's work to drive digitalization, I'll come to the second element, which is more about cross-border collaboration. In an interconnected world, collaboration is essential for unlocking the full benefits of digitalization and data. At the HKMA, we recognize the importance of fostering strong cross-border payments, cross-border partnerships, especially in the area of data payment. But in fact, we're doing a lot also in the area of cross-border payments. By establishing secure framework for data exchange and also building digital trade corridors, we can promote trust and facilitate seamless transactions, enabling businesses to expand their global reach and also capture emerging opportunities. For example, under a recently signed MOU, we are already exploring the possibility of connecting the CDI that I just mentioned with the SME financing platform developed by the ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets. We hope to facilitate cross-border trading by addressing potential pain points in some of the cross-border banking services. And if successful, I hope that we can, this connection can be the start of different linkages with our major trading partners. And talking about banking services, let's turn our attention to the third element, which is the need to digitize the banking processes, which is vital in enhancing efficiency and also reducing friction in trade and finance. By streamlining the banking processes in areas like credit approval or KYC, we can enable businesses to access financing more efficiently, minimize duplication of effort, and also improve the customer experience. We are committed to leveraging technology to transform banking operations, for example, by enabling more direct access to the commercial credit reference data through our CDI. We can enhance the speed and accuracy of credit assessment conducted by banks, facilitate smoother trade financing, and also support the growth of businesses across different sectors. Now, the fourth element will center around digitizing supply chain and manufacturing platforms, while connecting all these isolated digital networks. The digitization of supply chain and manufacturing platforms is essential to optimize operations and also drive productivity gains. By embracing technologies like the IoT, blockchain, or AI, we can create a seamless flow of information, goods, and services across the entire value chain. We can also enhance visibility and traceability throughout the supply chain by integrating and connecting siloed digital networks. And that will enable businesses to collaborate more effectively, reduce costs, improve inventory management, and also respond more swiftly to changing market conditions. And to achieve this synergy effect, we are also exploring the possibility of connecting the CDI with supply chain platform developed by the Fung Group, hoping to further digitize trade and trade financing through the use of innovative technologies. And finally, the fifth element that I would like to talk about focuses on exploring more advanced digital payment options. When as digital trade continues to evolve, it is important to embrace innovative payment solutions. And by exploring innovations like programmable money and also smart contracts, we can help businesses reduce transaction costs, mitigate risks, and also develop new business models. Programmable money can enable automated and secure transactions with preset conditions, while smart contracts can ensure trust, efficiency, and transparency in transactions. At the ASHK, we are already exploring payment innovations like central bank digital currency at both wholesale and retail levels through two projects. One is called mBridge project that we do together with 3 other central banks, China, Thailand, and UAE, under the auspices of the Bank for International Settlement. The idea is very simple, to use blockchain platform and use central bank digital currency to allow cross-border payments to be made directly in a much cheaper and faster way. Basically, real-time delivery plus probably about half the current cost. And the other project is called Project e-Hong Kong Dollar, which is more about the retail application of central bank digital currency. We are now, we've just conducted 14 different pilots, and we've identified 3 areas that we will explore further in the next year. One is programmability, second is tokenization, and third is instantaneous settlement. And of course, these areas go beyond just trade, but it is a good foundation that if we've got more innovative payment options, it can equally apply to trade finance and trade payments. And these advanced payment options will have the potential to further enhance Hong Kong's competitiveness in the global marketplace. Now that I've already introduced all 5 elements in digitizing trade and finance, it's important to note that they're not actually isolated, but rather quite interconnected and also mutually reinforcing. At the ASHK, we're also working hard to connect these key components through the CDI with a focus on achieving interoperability and interconnectivity. Digitalization of government services and also open government data provide the foundation for enhanced collaboration and more seamless data sharing via the CDI. And that in turn will support further digitalization of banking processes. And with CDI, we continue to explore new business use case by connecting different digital networks, such as the supply chain platforms and payment service providers, which can also serve as prospective data providers in the CDI ecosystem. And with a more comprehensive data ecosystem in place, we can further examine how advanced digital payment system can contribute to more robust digital trade and finance. So you can see that all these 5 elements are all connected with each other, and we can use CDI to play a very central role in connecting all these 5 elements. And before I close, let me share with you a real case that we see by the use of CDI. We've got a Mr. Wong who has founded a Hong Kong company that designs, develops, manufactures, and sells a collectible figure. I don't know whether you're one of the collectors. I am. They sell both locally and abroad. And Mr. Wong has always wanted to take full advantage of the growing business opportunities by developing new figures, but R&D will require funding and cash flow. And this got Mr. Wong to apply for different bank loans from different banks, but through the more traditional process, it took a long time to process, and he really couldn't get a loan, and the interest rate that was quoted was too prohibitive. And so he was forced to delay part of his expansion plan. But things took a turn, and he was introduced to CDI. And through CDI, his company shared alternative data with banks, like the electronic trade declarations records that show all his imports of materials and exports of his products almost in real time. And it also shows the company's inventory value and scale of operations. And with all these alternative data, he actually got a very, very fast, he got his loans approved in a very fast way through an innovative banks, and importantly, at a reduced cost of interest rates. This real case actually illustrates how important data is for SMEs. If they want a faster speed to market, and also hopefully cheaper funding to support the expansion of their business and without collateral as well. And that story is just one example of how businesses can benefit from progress in the use of one or two areas of the 5 elements that I talk about. And now just imagine that if we have a more robust landscape that can be created when all 5 elements are in place, by just harnessing the power of technology and embracing all these interconnected elements, business in Hong Kong can reap the benefits of digital trade and finance. And together we can create a thriving digital economy and consolidate our position as a global hub for trade finance. And this is what we're aiming at, developing all the 5 new elements and benefit the corporates, especially the SMEs, so that they can have an opportunity to get into global, or at least regional trade and hopefully global trade through digitized services. And I've just given you a central bank's perspective on our path towards digitalization of trade and finance. I'm sure that you all agree that this is a broad and complex topic involving many different areas. And the views of great minds from across sectors are always needed. And with a panel discussion to follow, I will now hand over to the experts from the other sectors to share their insights on digital trade and finance, and also how to reinvigorate growth in Hong Kong. Once again, thank you very much for having me here today, and I wish you a very successful panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie, for laying out the landscape of digital finance in Hong Kong. And now I'd like to invite on stage private sector reaction. The next panel is going to be moderated by Lulu Chen of Bloomberg, and it includes Doug Arner, who is a professor of law at Hong Kong University, Venkat, who is head of trade and payments for HSBC, Peter Burnett, managing director of Standard Chartered Bank, and Justin D'Agostino, the global CEO of Herbert Smith Freehills. So, over to you.
Whilst they're getting themselves situated, just a public announcement: if you are a lady and you have lost an earring, a diamond and ruby, I think it's diamond and ruby, I'm not an expert at these things. If someone has lost what looks to me like an expensive earring, could they come and see me? Because I'd hate to see it go to... behave.
Good afternoon. As the global economy realigns, supply chains fracture, technology and AI disrupts industries, we're here to discuss the key opportunities for Hong Kong trade and finance business and the essential policy frameworks that are needed to build the city's role as a future-ready trade financial hub. In the previous panel, we've heard from the companies that are upending the latest technologies in marine and also air shipping. In this panel, we're going to hear from the representatives in the legal and finance industry. On this panel, we have Douglas Arner, who is Kerry Holdings Professor in Law, University of Hong Kong, Justin D'Agostino, who is the CEO of Herbert Smith Freehills, and Venkat Raman, who is the Managing Director of Global Head and Trade Services at HSBC, and last but not least, Peter Burnett, Managing Director of Standard Chartered Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. We just heard the remarks from Eddie Yu, and I'd like all of the panelists to reflect on what he said and what your key takeaways are. I'll start with Venkat.
Thanks. First of all, thank you very much. It's a great opportunity to meet everyone and kind of share thoughts and hear about what the others think. But it was a great session to hear Eddie talking about how they planned the whole digitization for Hong Kong and to get Hong Kong to a position of being a global leader in the new fintech world or the digitization world. I think what intrigued me quite a bit was the way it's planned in terms of the 5 key steps. I think I'm totally aligned. 2 or 3 of them is something we always talk about, but this one was quite structured. I think what's going to be required is each of us to then play our parts to make that happen.
Peter?
Thanks very much. Well, Eddie Yu is the bank regulator, so I agreed with everything he said. Stellar performance. I think he's left the room, so he can't even bathe in that glory. But look, I thought it was very, very interesting. And he was very focused on data, which I think is absolutely right. And in particular, this development that the HKMA has been at the forefront of CDI, commercial data interchange, which is really about moving old credit assessments away from, frankly, looking at financial statements to looking at actual trading data and being able to make informed credit decisions based on that more up-to-date, immediate trading data rather than financial statements that are 6 or 12 months out of date. So data is going to be the success, is going to be key to the success of this development. And alongside data, you need data analytics. So it's good for anybody who's specialized in data analytics. Gathering the data is actually, frankly, not the problem. There is a plethora. There's far too much data. It's how you take that data and analyze it. And the CDI is a very good step in that direction.
Justin?
Thanks, Lulu. My name isn't Thai, but it's still complicated to pronounce. A Scottish-Italian name. But thanks, Lulu, and it's lovely to be here, everyone. None of us had sight of Eddie Yu's speech, so we're all really on the spot in terms of reacting to that. But I think it gave me a lot of encouragement, actually, Lulu, a lot of hope. I was also going to pick up the data point. I think the line I liked best from the speech was, data is the new blood of the digital body. I was thinking, is that right, or is it more the nervous system of the digital body, because it kind of is transmitting signals to the whole body? And I think I was going to pick up on the data point myself, because if I try and put this into sort of practical terms, when I'm speaking to corporates and boards, they are all sort of worried about how to deal with the plethora of data that now exists, not only in the world, but in their business. So the use of data, the organization of data is critically important. And the reason I say it's like the nervous system is because the more that you can harness data in your organization, the more that you can use it, you will make better decisions. And that's the real key to data. So actually, I think having the government, having the HKMA really focused on this data piece is important. But just one last point, and I know we'll get into this on this panel. These 5 elements, there's a huge amount in there and potentially a great deal of change. And that, I think, is also what corporates, financial institutions are also grappling with. How do we deal with all this change? Legislation isn't yet written to respond to all of this. Regulation isn't yet written to respond to all of this. So there's a lot for us to work through, and actually to ensure we have a framework in place that will allow all these 5 elements to come to life and actually work.
Thanks for that. And first, I'd like to say congratulations to the ICC on the 25th anniversary, and thanks for the invitation to be here. It's been interesting because Eddie didn't mention this, but it's also been the 30th anniversary celebration of the HKMA and the 25th anniversary celebration of the Bank for International Settlements office here in Hong Kong. And I think after a sort of week of actual these celebrations, certain things come out, and I think he highlighted these very well. If we think about from the financial sector standpoint, what are some of the things that have made Hong Kong into a major international trade finance center? The first is really payments. The HKMA, over its entire history, has done a tremendous amount of work on cross-border payments. Hong Kong dollars, US dollars, euros, RMB, all with wholesale interbank payment systems based here in Hong Kong that are tremendously enabling from the standpoint of cross-border business. The second has been the regulation of the banking and insurance sector to keep those stable, but also to develop the financing capacity. I think the freedom of capital flows, the legal system, all of these have gone together. And I think when we look forward at, say, the next 25 years, it's going to be similar issues. And I think Eddie hit on many of those. But I think one thing that we're likely to discuss a bit more is not just the Hong Kong context, but how data or payments or government processes operate on a cross-border basis, and that is the real need for strategy going forward.
Yeah, those are all really great points on data, legal framework, and also, Douglas, your point on what actually makes Hong Kong a leader of trade finance. I wonder if any of the other panelists have any thoughts on taking a step back. Where is Hong Kong in this point in time in terms of where it stands as a trade financing hub?
Let me give it a go. So I think back in terms of why, and Eddie did mention about it, Hong Kong is still one of the biggest trading hubs. And that's for 2 or 3 reasons, right? One, in terms of what it means, it's been a gateway to China, and that's been a big positive. So it's something that creates business, and that's been its role. Coming back to the financial infrastructure that represents this country, that's been, again, a very positive one. And in terms of, finally, the people and the resources that this country has in terms of, talent or the regional trade center. So that's something that already exists in Hong Kong. I think there is a trend that we do also observe that companies in China are expanding more, wanting to go outside of Hong Kong and the other parts of Asia. I think that's where, again, Hong Kong can and will play a very important role, and to how to enable that and to make that happen. And I think finally, one thing that Hong Kong also has, and we got to remember, we've got the regional hubs of many of the big corporates who represent globally out here, and they are present with their businesses. So those are the 3 factors. So I believe, yes, there are changes that are happening to the global supply chain, but Hong Kong would continue to play that important role. And in fact, there's a clear potential that they could go further up. So digitization could be their big upside to change their positioning.
I mean, I would add, Lulu, I think we should all recognize Hong Kong was actually built on trade finance. The foundations are incredibly strong. But I think what came out from Pamela and other people's remarks earlier is there's something of a feeling of a lack of confidence that we have the plan and the confidence and the commitment to now digitize and take this to the next level. And I think, actually, because Hong Kong's under the spotlight and under the microscope, and the perception of a lot of things that one does in Hong Kong now is much more difficult than it was just a few years ago, we've got to go even harder and faster and be clearer and be committed. So I think that confidence should be there, because the foundations, it's in the DNA of Hong Kong, but there's a huge amount to do now, and I think, but well placed to do it. And actually, I think the Eddie Yu's comments actually show that a lot of these difficult issues are now being gripped, and actually, they're trying to be innovative and move forward in a world-leading way.
I just want to make 2 quick points. And I think if we look at finance generally, we can see 3 major sorts of factors influencing. The first is really around tensions between globalization and fragmentation. The second is technological changes, and the third are all around sustainability issues. And I think we'll come back to the second and third. But I want to pick up something on this fragmentation point, because I think from a Hong Kong standpoint, we often miss that it's actually a tremendous opportunity. In other words, we're moving in a direction where we have a much more multipolar economy and financial system. And we are one of the key nodes in that system. If anything, a bit of fragmentation means that some of the centralization that was previously present in single global hubs is no longer possible. And that, in fact, the opportunities from the standpoint of Hong Kong, particularly serving that Chinese portion of that multipolar economy, are very significant.
The point about upping the game and also trying to capture the new opportunities, we're seeing the competition from other countries. What are some of the trends that you're seeing from other regions that you think are worth noticing at this point?
Gosh, well, what I would say is that it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, by the way. I think that we want all of these trading centers to be strong and prosperous. I know that we play the game of Hong Kong versus Singapore versus Dubai versus Shanghai, but actually, versus New York, London, and so on. But actually, if all of these centers can be successful, then you'll see a great deal more prosperity around the world. And I say that, you know, at Standard Chartered Bank, we want Singapore and Hong Kong to succeed, right? And HSBC the same, right? We're vested in both centers being successful, and I think there's space enough for us to be able to do that. But look, I think what we see around the world is clearly the development of trust as an important component in successful financial centers. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you need a financial center that has systemically strong pillars in it that people trust it. And Hong Kong has got that in abundance. So we have, I mean, you know, we all know what they are, right? It's the rule of law, it's the international style regulation, it's an open capital account combined with a convertible currency. These are all things that people like when they're dealing with financial centers. In addition to that, we've got the linked exchange rate mechanism, and that Hong Kong dollar peg, we should not underestimate the strength of that as a magnet that attracts people, because it's tried and tested. It's been around for a long time, and it's very much tried and tested. And then on top of that, we have this great ecosystem of banks, of financial institutions, of lawyers, of accountants, of IT consultants, of insurance, which is very, very difficult to replicate elsewhere. So I know I'm not really I'm answering your question in the context of what Hong Kong can contribute. I think that where we can do better is around some of the guidelines for digitization, and we've had that discussion in the first panel, actually, which I concur with. So, but that's incumbent upon us as practitioners, basically to put the case to the government, to the authorities, to say, this is what we need. We need some more of this to be able to really expand and grow and prosper.
Yeah, if I may just add a few, I mean, absolutely, I concur to most of the points, and the most important one about, you know, Hong Kong along with the other hubs, you know, how they can prosper together. A few trends that we do observe, and that's where I think Hong Kong can use those as like a trigger for growth. Clearly, we spoke about the supply chain changes that's happening. I think that's an area of trigger that can be used. ESG, a lot has changed from companies and customers having plans. It's moved on to real actions, things changing, projects happening, financing happening. So that's the other trend we see, and that's, again, an opportunity. The other thing I think Eddie mentioned about services trade, I think that's a trend that we observe globally from, I think, give or take, it's at about 20% right now. What the last I heard, it's going to grow at about 30% as per IMF. Now, that's a massive opportunity that exists globally, and especially in the Asia region. That's something that Hong Kong could tap. Last but not the least, I think the one big trend, and I know digitization in trade is looked at a bit on the slower side than what people expected, but think back 3 years, we did not have the legal framework, etc. But today, you do have countries rolling out laws around that. Laws take really long, but this was quick in the UK, or you look at Singapore, and I'm sure Hong Kong will have its own plans. Even more, I even see regulators taking interest, creating the ecosystem where you can have a transaction. We spoke about mBridge, CBDC. When is the last time those things happened? So I'm very positive, and again, Hong Kong is playing a strong role, but it's about now execution and scaling these things up.
I think on your question, Lulu, about what we're seeing around the world, I've been giving a bit of thought to what's the playbook for this perfect ecosystem that you've both talked about now. It's difficult, but I think the two words that we should take away from today are a drive for certainty and a trust in the system. So certainty and trust. And we probably have neither, really, at the moment in terms of all this change we're seeing. And that's fine, but I think there's a desire to get there. I mean, John Denton in his keynote this morning, he said what we need is rules-based multilateral system. You know, there are no alternatives. We need policy alignment on a global basis. Well, I don't think, you know, that's a great ambition, I think, but that will take a huge amount of time and effort to get there. So what can we be doing in the meantime? And I think that perfect ecosystem will require a very close look at legislation, regulation, assurance from government that they're not going to backtrack. So what did someone use the word guidance earlier, but I think assurance and a system around enforcement. If things go wrong, we know that there's a way out or a way through it. And I think government and private need to work together on that playbook, I think. But the speed of this, we've not got the luxury of time. I mean, I've sat on the Hong Kong Law Reform Commission subcommittee, you know, changing legislation on things. And I think we were the fastest subcommittee ever at 2 years to change a law. And we don't have that sort of time, I think, to get this ecosystem in place. So I think there needs to be more speed around this, but that's complicated.
And to Peter's point about rule of law, I'd love to tap in more about that. What are your thoughts on the importance of upholding that?
Oh, I mean, it's absolutely critical. I mean, the playbook requires a strong rule of law. I mean, courts which are reliable, arbitration framework which is accessible and efficient, a regulatory framework which people understand and trust. We have all that in this jurisdiction in spades, but it's critical to uphold if you are striving to, whatever the word is behind me on the board, and in terms of global leadership. That part of the playbook is essential.
And it just to quickly interject there, it is part of the trust that you have to build and that Hong Kong does have, I think. Hong Kong is one of the fewer jurisdictions in this part of the world where you can take the government to court and win. There are not many, actually. There are not many, and we've seen it again and again. Not again and again. Don't not for the minutes. Every now and then we see it. It's very refreshing, I think, that, and not only does it happen, but the Hong Kong government responds very sensibly to those actions.
Yes, and law firms such as mine are not put on any blacklist for taking on that work. I mean, that's part of the rough and tumble in Hong Kong, and long may that continue. Of course, it will.
You know, 2 quick points on that, because I think it's some interesting trends. The first is we often talk about bargaining power and choice of law and contracts. And what we're seeing is that increasingly, as China is doing business with more and more countries where the bargaining power rests with the Chinese counterparty, they are doing exactly what you would expect, which is wanting to have their own governing law or a locally familiar governing law in those contracts. And I think that this is quite a significant development from the standpoint of the legal profession and the legal industry in the context of Hong Kong. The other relates to the fact that when you have a country emerging as one of the world's major creditors, major trading partners, and you have economic cycles, you will have disputes. And as a result of that, we are seeing an increasing use of a wider range of culturally preferred dispute resolution systems in this jurisdiction.
I didn't mean to smile when he said disputes, but, you know, it's our bread and butter.
Well, solicitors and arbitrators are on the forefront of that. the legal framework we've established, the lacking of it is one of the reasons why we have 99% of the digital the trade in paper. On the financing side, what are the challenges facing financial institutions like yourself, and what are the opportunities in that?
Let me go for that. Look, I think going back, as financial institutions, the role that we play is to make sure we enable financing, risk mitigation, make sure businesses thrive. I think that's been, and I think most importantly, if I see an umbrella layer, it's kind of the trusted partner for our clients or businesses that are in Hong Kong. I think we've got to take that part away. We've been doing business in a way, and Eddie mentioned about credit decision making, which historically look at balance sheets, you analyze their stock, book debts. I think that's got to change, and that's what some of the things that banks are doing.
So what's the workflow like right now?
So today, I would say there are two parts of the bank. One part of the bank, yes, it continues the way, but we do have far more efficient data coming in for a part of it. But what's interesting, and you would have probably heard with HSBC, we've kind of partnered with, say, an ASHK TV mall to enable financing for their merchants. And that one was purely led by data. We stopped looking at the way. So I think we're improving there. I think for anything new, we're clearly going the digital way. We're building it as if it's a new business, only purely on a digital front. I think the challenge or the bigger task is go back to our existing book, existing business, and figure out how we do that. And coming back, the CDI could play a big role, because data is something today that's not available in terms of enabling this. We are building infrastructure which can digest data. The question is the structure of the data, and probably even the presence of data in a trusted form of data is where the challenge is right now.
We're also in an interesting point in the investing cycle, where traditional VCs have subsided in funding. So financial institutions like yourself, Peter, are you taking a more proactive role? What are the investments that you're making in the industry?
Yeah, there's been a very interesting change that I think has happened over the last 12 to 18 months, particularly with capital perhaps being a bit less abundant as interest rates have gone up, and deliberately central banks have been withdrawing quantitative easing and reducing their balance sheets. It means that capital now really has to earn a return. So many of the fintechs in the past have been able to get hold of abundant capital and experiment with it, frankly. Whereas the incumbents like ourselves have never been able to do that. We've always had to provide a return to our shareholders. So we can tuck a little bit away where people don't really see it, but we can't experiment with abundant amount of capital in the same way that the fintechs have been able to. That changed, frankly, and we've seen it in a change in the way fintechs have been valued as well, that valuations have come down. Instead of being sort of billion-dollar unicorns, they've had to adjust valuations down because capital is not so abundant. And so what we're now seeing, actually, is a coming together of the incumbents, like ourselves, HSBC, Standard Chartered, and others, with those fintechs, because they have strengths which we acknowledge. They're often very enterprising, they've got good ideas, they've got plenty of energy, and they're able to focus very much on a specific part of the value chain in trade finance and try and digitize it even further. And we have 160 odd years of customer experience. We know what it's like to be regulated. We're comfortable in that space. We have capital, but we have to get a return on that capital. And so I think what we find now is that we work with the fintechs very much, and they come together with us. And we found in some of the investments that we've made that the fintechs have actually preferred to come to an incumbent bank because we've got customers and we've got experience of operating in a marketplace which they don't necessarily have. So I think I think we've seen a massive improvement actually as a consequence of that development.
That's Really interesting. And on the topic of investing in technology, what are your thoughts on the opportunities in AI and how it could be applied to trade financing?
Well, that's a big one. I think I was in San Francisco a week ago at the APEC CEO Summit, and there was this fascinating panel with a representative from Google, a representative from Microsoft, and Sam Altman, then CEO of OpenAI. That was on the Thursday. And I flew back to Hong Kong, and as I landed, I opened up my mobile phone and went to it was the FT, not Bloomberg, I'm afraid, and he'd been fired, and he was holding forth on AI. And at the end of that particular panel, all three were asked, so what should we expect in the next 12 months as far as AI is concerned? And the Google and I can't remember what they said. The Google and Microsoft guys both predicted something for their business. And Sam Altman said, you should expect AI in 12 months to far exceed the expectations of anybody in this room. And we were all sort of, oh dear. Well, then he was fired the next day, so I don't know if it was something he said, but he's back. So he's now going to execute on that plan. So to answer your question, I think it's very, very difficult to predict. And the one thing about all of the technologies that we've been using to date is that there is a plan for them, right? We embrace DLT, or we embrace blockchain with a particular plan because we want to execute faster, or because we want to reduce cost, or whatever the plan is, or it's a bit of the supply chain financing area that we want to focus on. And we know what the outcome is, we know what the focus is, we know what the plan is. The problem with AI is nobody knows where it's going to lead, frankly, which is why the other dialogue that took place in San Francisco was regulation versus guardrails. Obviously, government wants regulation. Sam Altman wants guardrails. That was we will definitely see progress or developments there in the next 12 months. But when we sit down this time next year, if we're celebrating the 26th anniversary of the ICC, then you might just see a bunch of robots up here.
I think it'll be our avatars, won't it?
Yeah. No, if I may just add one point on that. I mean, AI, as a joke, somebody said, what is it going to do? I said, why don't you ask AI what's going to say, what's going to look like? Probably that's the best way. But on a serious note, AI, I completely agree. What's the roadmap? I don't believe everybody has a clarity on that, but clearly people know it's going to do a lot. I mean, right from a 5-year kid to probably an old person, people are kind of started using it in various ways. So the applications are almost abundant. But I think 2 or 3 things that come up in every conversation: the ethical use of data, because it does do that. The IP has become a big challenge, like what's IP, what's not IP, itself has become a big discussion, and I think, Peter, you can add more. And the last thing, I guess, yes, governments and overall policymakers are worried, the economics that it'll have on people's employment, etc. I think those 3 things come up in every AI discussion, in my opinion. But personally, AI, the kind of things it does, it surprises me every day as a personal user.
A couple of things to add, Lulu, but I was speaking at an event earlier this year, and there were 3 panelists. One was a lawyer, me, one was a banker, and the third panelist was ChatGPT. And I thought, bloody hell, what's going to... So, there's no rehearsal. The Lulu asked a question of me and the banker, and then asked ChatGPT the same question. I thought, we're going to be really embarrassed, because ChatGPT is going to come out with this fabulous answer. They're going to make us look like morons. Actually, it did really, really well. I mean, it was amazing, what it came out with. And probably the only thing that wasn't particularly apparent was, it couldn't read the questionnaire couldn't feel the body language, couldn't see when the audience was starting to get bored. It didn't have any of that emotional connection that we all have, but it was incredibly impressive, I thought. So actually, next panel, we need ChatGPT. But I tell you that, hand over to you, there are things we do know. I mean, ChatGPT 2023 is the year we will now all remember in terms of AI. That was this year, and that was because of ChatGPT. And it's sort of taken it, for most people, from, I guess, sort of from science fiction to the front pages. It's suddenly real. And where it's manifesting itself for me in real life is boards, company strategies, we're all looking at, okay, what are we going to do about our AI? What's our data strategy? What's our digitalization strategy, our digital transformation strategy? It was there. It was kind of medium term. I'm not so much for the banks. But, you've been ahead of the curve for a long time. 2023 has catapulted digital strategy to the top of the corporate agenda, because every organization now needs to look at what they sell and to whom, and to think about how digitalization is going to impact on their products. And that's everything from lawyers to people that manufacture stuff. It affects everyone. And we can see through ChatGPT and AI, which of course has been around for a long time. Artificial intelligence isn't new. But my God, can it read things quickly? Can it digest things quickly? Can it give you answers? So this is not going anywhere. And if you're in a room here and you are in a leadership position or you're on a board or whatever, and digital transformation isn't on every agenda, get it on the agenda.
Can I just do a quick poll? How many people in this room have downloaded ChatGPT? Put up your hands. Oh, it's okay.
I don't think you're allowed under our policy.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Pretty good.
Just I think 2 quick points. The first is I completely agree about the transformative moment, and I'll come back to that. 2 areas where I think we're really seeing this from trade finance. If we look at AI and financial services, it's got a long history. This is the sector that has probably done some of the greatest use and development. And if we think about the 4 areas where it's been used the most, 3 of those are directly related to trade finance. One is securities trading, and that's not necessarily related to trade finance. The 3 that are, the first is very much fraud detection. If you think about Visa, MasterCard, massive payment systems, those alerts that you get on your phone whenever you go to some other country about use of your card, that is an AI system, and this is one of our most developed use cases. The second is really around market integrity and AML. This is something that, particularly since 2012, which is really a transformative year from the standpoint of approaches to AML and market integrity, we've seen an incredible range of uses. And the third is the one that we flagged quite a bit already, and that is from the standpoint of credit analytics. Clearly, Amazon, Ant are sort of your big examples of using AI, automating big data access from the standpoint of a variety of both consumer and trade credit provision. But if I think about Gen AI in particular, there are 2 things that I think come to mind. The first is it makes data sets which were previously not easily accessible very accessible. So imagine you have a corporate email system which has millions and millions of messages. You can attach a Gen AI bot to that and ask it endless sorts of questions. Tremendously useful. And any data set which is non-public, which is previously not accessible in an easy manner, it now is. And this is transformative from the standpoint of particularly large businesses that have vast amounts of data that they haven't been able to use effectively. The second is really the other side of that, and that is from the standpoint of cybersecurity, fraud, and crime. The criminal uses and the criminal take-up, if anything, are far higher than we're seeing anywhere else.
Lulu, can I share one statistic? And then Pamela's saying we need to take questions or wrap up. I'm not sure what it says. I've not got my glasses on. One statistic. You know, we were talking today about certainty and trust. So we did some research over the summer and asked people about, our clients, about the trust in AI. 22% outright distrustful, like in panic stations, don't trust any of it. Only 5% had no concerns. And if you thought that was an age thing, the under 35s that responded, only 9% had no concerns. There's a huge distrust, a huge need for governments and the private sector to work out how we gain some trust in this and put some rules around it, or some guide rails at the very least. But there's a lot of uncertainty and mistrust, distrust in what's out there, and that's potentially going to hold us all back, because we need to start using these tools more effectively. And as lawyers, we're really struggling with this, because anything you put into ChatGPT, you know, the main system, it's not private. So you can't put your client's private information in there. And most of the things that we do are under strict rules of confidentiality and the like. So there's a lot to work through.
Absolutely fascinating. Following Pamela's directives, shall we open up the panel and see if there are any questions from the audience?
Well, I know you have questions. Or I know you have comments.
While the audience are thinking about their questions, I actually do have one final question, which is, what would you like to see from the government when it comes to providing the right framework for trade and finance in Hong Kong?
Go to the professor first.
You know, I'm going to say the same thing that we've been saying from my time at the Financial Services Development Council, which is digital ID frameworks. Digital ID frameworks that can be used on an opt-in basis, on a cross-border basis, either across GBA or more broadly. And I think this is something where, you know, Hong Kong's ID cards 20 years ago when they came out were amazing. Today, they're not so much. And if we look around the world, some of the digital ID systems we're seeing both on the individual, but particularly on the corporate side, I think this is where we have to move, or we're going to miss opportunities.
I'll leave Peter to do the big visionary one, but I'm going to just go very micro, and say we need rules and legislation around signing contracts and getting, you know, we are very old-fashioned and clunky here, and that is holding us back.
I think we need to ensure that the Hong Kong niche is maintained. You know, Warren Buffett talks about investing in a business that's got a moat around it. Yeah, and we need to make sure that there is a big, strong moat around Hong Kong. And I think that, you know, the niche that we have is the role that we play in the Greater Bay Area, and so working on you know, it's the old EU movement of people, goods, services, and capital. And the more freedoms we can get there, which I know are complex, the better. And that will serve us in Hong Kong extremely well.
Yep. If I may add, I think we've covered most of the point, but I completely agree on the trust or stability part from a legal framework or the direction from the regulator or the government. I think the data piece, and more importantly, a data infrastructure, right? If, you know, one of the points on digital quick credit decisioning, and end of the day, as an institution, we are here and the government wants businesses to be financed faster, cheaper, and more efficient. So I think the creation of that data and the data infrastructure which can be used is, I think, should be one of the center points.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sebastian Mann of the XCOM of ICC Hong Kong. Clearly, I'm the only thing between you and your cocktail. So I was, let alone the arrival of our Chief Executive, John Lee. So I was told to be very quick, and indeed I will be very quick. Clearly, Hong Kong was the world's busiest physical port some time ago, and with China, with China's growth, our importance has diminished. But with what's going on in the GBA that we talked about earlier, the Middle East and all the various parts of the world, there are many opportunities for Hong Kong in this digital world. Today, we hear from the keynote speakers, we hear from the panelists about all the challenges and the opportunities in front of us. And not surprisingly, we have heard Singapore mentioned so many times. And not only that, we heard about Thailand. So this is really the opportunity, and it is important for the government, for the private sector, for the financial services industry, for our legal friends to really work together to reassert Hong Kong to be the global leadership in trade. So on that note, thanks everybody for joining us in the conference, and also please proceed to the rooftop for your pre-reception drinks, as they need to clear the premise for the arrival of the Chief Executive. And then we look forward to seeing you at the reception later on today. Thank you.